Hello, and welcome to Nomadic Diaries, the re-entry series. I'm Doreen Cumberford, the host.
And I'm Linda Mueller, the co-host. Hi, everyone. This is Linda Mueller, and today I'm here to talk about the landed phase of repatriation with our very special guest, Margaret Ghielmetti. Hi, Margaret.
Hey, Linda. Thanks for having me.
We're so glad that you joined us. This week, we're discussing what it's like to move back to your passport country after having lived abroad, and more importantly, how to turn this experience into an empowering opportunity to write your own next chapter. But before we get into that today, I'd like to introduce Margaret to you. She's a multi-talented creative who has lived on 4 continents and nearly 50 countries. She's the author of Bravish, a memoir of a recovering perfectionist, which she wrote to inspire readers that it's never too late to learn to live our own lives if we dare to let go of outdated roles and rules we thought kept us safe. And also to entertain readers with her adventures and sometimes misadventures abroad, sharing what each country taught her that she would have never learned on her own. Now, there's a lot to unpack there in this episode, but before we get to that, I want to explain why I referred to her as a multi-talented creative by sharing some of her accolades. Bravish earned silver in Story Circle's Gilda Prize. The New York Times published her tiny love story, A Memory Mea Culpa, and she's been quoted online in Time, Authority Magazine, and Next Avenue. She also won 2 story slams with the Moth Live Lit storytelling show. And her solo show, Fierce, is about reclaiming her genuine voice and expression in midlife. And there's more. Her other creative passions include photography, improv, and coaching others to tell their stories. And of course, travel, as many of you listening, I'm sure, can relate. Now back to the book. Bravish takes Margaret and her Swiss hotelier husband from New York City to Paris, Cairo, Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, Chiang Mai, and Bangkok, Thailand, Singapore, and back to her hometown of Chicago, with significant stops in India and Switzerland, where she is today. Wow, Margaret, so many countries and so many accomplishments. You've done a fabulous job of weaving the excitement and growth that so many of us equate with international life into your life back home.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you mentioning all these things, Linda. That really makes me feel happy. And it's certainly been a journey. You and I have talked about this, and I'm completely committed to helping other people know that, what I'm hoping for all of us is to find our own voice and tell our story if we want to. So my lifestyle now is partly back in Chicago, which is my hometown. Well, I grew up the first city north of Chicago, and partly in Switzerland, which is my husband's home country. So I've inherently always had this international lifestyle. And so we a little bit shuttle back and forth. And then, yeah, as you said, we still love to travel. It's a passion that I've had since I was a kid. My mom even said, you were born with 1 foot grounded in our hometown and 1 foot out in the world, which is a very strange visual image, but definitely describes how I am very much at home and out in the world.
And so it sounds like actually, I should just say, when did you start traveling internationally? Was it when you were younger? It wasn't when your husband took this position.
Right. No, I had traveled extensively before I met Patrick. My first international trip was with my parents to Toronto when I was 13. And I just remember thinking, this is it, man. I want to be doing this all the time. I just felt so exotic. And I still love Toronto. And then I studied languages. My university degrees are in Arabic and French. And then I graduated quickly so I could start traveling. And I traveled all around Europe. I worked for the Italian government for many, many years. I worked in the hotel field, always promoting international and traveling whenever I could. The fascination for me never dims. I always say, if I could visit every single country in the world, I would. There's a possibility that won't happen, but I love the world. I love the world.
And so do you still, now that you're in your repatriation phase, do you still spend quite a bit time traveling?
I definitely do. I always tell people, because my husband Patrick facilitates leadership work literally around the world. So people always ask me, why aren't you traveling with him? Well, I did travel with him quite a bit when we lived overseas. And I always joke that when I go to someplace I don't know, I hit it hard. So I never know if I'm going to go back. So there are a lot of places, it's not that I don't want to go back, but I have other commitments that I want to keep. But if there's someplace new, and yes, invite me to go anywhere, I will pretty much say yes.
Okay, so what I'm getting is you've been international your whole life. And even in this chapter, you're still getting out and about, but you're also pursuing other interests that you have. So how do you spend your time in that way? Are you still writing? What are you doing?
Yes, I am. Absolutely. And I have a new project that I'm working on, which I'd be happy to describe. But I will say, I think that for your listeners, many of them, I hope can relate to this. It can be hard sometimes to keep up the momentum when we're between places and between continents and between commitments. So I do find that still quite challenging, that I'll be in Chicago for a few months at a time. I can do some live storytelling, but then when we come to Switzerland to be with Patrick's family, all of a sudden there are things I just can't do in a row. It's like the old adage, you can have it all, but not at the same time. So that's something that I feel as an expatriate, repatriate, international person I'm lucky that I'm a writer and an artist, because that's not something that's tied to a particular place. So yes, I am still writing, and I'm taking Memoir in a year for the second time through Story Studio for the project that I'm working on. And luckily this time it's online. The first time I did it was to help me with my first book, and that was in person in Chicago, and that would not work for me now, but online does.
Great. Well, let's definitely dig into your project towards the end. I think for now, I would like to go a little bit into the actual repatriation experience. You've repatriated more than once. Is that correct?
I have. So it was a different experience each time. I mean, certainly living in Europe when I did as a very young person, it was a shock to come home. But that was because it was such an awakening for me to be in these amazing places and fall in love with cultures, and then come back to kind of real life back in Chicago was an adjustment. And then, yes, once I started following Patrick's career, as not my favorite term, the trailing spouse, the first time we repatriated, I found that very, very challenging, because I really wasn't prepared for the culture shock coming back. What I learned by the time we repatriated again is, first of all, hook up with international women like you. I mean, I really value that. I have to be around people whose life does not end at the county line. I can't do it.
Right.
I can't do it. So that's, to me, what I always say to people is, when they're moving overseas, I always say to people, please try to cast a wide net I'm always looking for that one person I can have a coffee with and be myself, but sometimes it needs a wide net. And I have found that repatriating too, but with a focus on, for sure, first of all, get hooked up with international women, because they get me. I get them.
Right. Well, and we're in Chicago, so we're fortunate. It may be a little bit easier to find quote unquote international women here. But do you have any tips for people that maybe aren't living in a big city? Like, what's a great way to start finding these people?
That is a really great question, because you're right. I'm between larger cities. I do think by now there's so much online. It's not the same thing. I mean, person to person contact is so precious to me. But there are so many resources. I mean, what you offer, what other people offer, what organizations offer, there are so many ways to be connected. I do know what you're saying. In a smaller town, that's difficult to find a group of humans in person. But I do think the resources are so miles and miles ahead of where they were when I started life as an expatriate, that I feel grateful that people have support. I do think sometimes they need to look for it, because I think sometimes I know a lot of people can isolate and feel very alone and not understood in their journey. And so I do encourage people to really do that step of reaching out, even if it's quote unquote just online, to connect to people who will understand our experience.
I agree. And I heard you say earlier, you encourage people to cast a wide net. And I think that's important in terms of meeting people, but also in terms of mindset, right? Like not
Yes.
pigeonholing, like I need to find a person that fits this exact profile. And also
Right.
starting with low hanging fruit, and maybe low hanging fruit is online, you can
Right.
still nowadays have a pretty nice conversation, just like we did before we started recording with
Right.
somebody online. So I think we always have to kind of keep a open mind about what's going to work and what's going to help us take just that next step, even if it doesn't get us all the way to where we want to be. Okay, we could talk about
I
that
think
for quite a while.
perfectly said, because you're right. I know when I first moved overseas, my commitment was, first of all, I was going to be settled in within, I probably gave myself, knowing me, 48 hours at a maximum to be like completely settled into the new setting. And with every subsequent move, and we've moved something like 18 times, I give myself more and more time, and I cast the net wider and wider. Because you're right, I was going to be totally settled in, and I was going to be completely embedded with the local community. I wasn't going to be around anyone from my hometown, anyone who spoke English. I mean, I was super rigid about that. And now I'm like, now I throw myself on the mercy of people. I'm like, please be my friend. I really think people want to help and want to be there in community, but it takes me reaching out. So I agree with you that just that first step.
And hearing you talk, and unfortunately our listeners can't see your body language, but as you were being expressive, in addition to speaking, I was thinking about your book, how the title is Bravish, with the ish in quotes, or no, not quotes, in parentheses, and a memoir of a recovering perfectionist. And you basically just explained it, right? Like the old you was like, this is perfect, this is how I have to do it. And the current you is much more forgiving of yourself, and you're showing compassion to yourself. And I mean, it's one of the reasons I encourage people to read your book, as I did a few years ago, because I think your journey of how you got from where you were to where you are is something we can all relate to, or many of us who have these perfectionist tendencies can relate to. So that was fun to see live and in action. I want to see if we can make some sort of a video clip to promote this episode out of your body language. It was beautiful. Since you brought up culture shock, I can't speak, culture shock / reverse culture shock, where are you now? Because you repatriated around the same time that I did to Chicago, 2017. And I'm just curious, some people say that they are in reverse culture shock for 10 years. Like, where would you say, if you think about the honeymoon phase, the frustration, the adaptation, and then finally the adjustment, where you're just living your life as it is now, like, where are you on that curve?
I think I've been lucky in that I really was coming back quite a bit, because my parents were nearing the end of their lives. And so I really made a point of spending quite a bit of time in Chicago for the latter part of all of our expatriate assignments. Patrick and I were not blessed with children, so I wasn't having to stay in the expatriate country to look after a family. I was back in the suburbs of Chicago looking after my parents. So I didn't have this dramatic, like, oh my gosh. So it's been easier for me than perhaps for someone else. And it's also, I'm really happy in Chicago. You can hear, I'm in Switzerland. That's a Swiss clock ringing. So just
I love it.
Confirm, we're really in Switzerland. It's right on time. So it was not that difficult for me. It was the first, as I say, the first time where I had come from Asia, in fact, where the service mentality is quite specific and really, really, really guest focused. And the first day back, I stopped by, I won't mention the name, a discount store where I sometimes, if I've got some money burning a hole in my pocket, I will spend $10. And it was just, it was just such a shock to me that I wasn't, in this really warm embrace. And my mom said, because I drove to her afterwards, she's like, that was maybe not your best choice. So maybe, ease in a bit gently to re-entry. But for me, honestly, I've spent enough time in both places, it wasn't as big a shock as I think it may have been for other people. That being said, I've been married to a Swiss person for 31 years, and there are still some things here. I mean, I've been coming here for 33 years that culturally, it's interesting to me. It's not that distinctive a culture, and yet I definitely run up against some culture shock being here. So that's kind of interesting to me. I speak French, and you'd think no culture shock, but indeed.
It's so interesting. I mean, I guess it's great that you're still learning and observing. And I think when we spend a substantial amount of time somewhere, even if we're not living there full time, we start to go down the layers and start to notice the nuances that we may miss as a vacationer.
So true. So true. And that's to me been the great privilege of living in all these different places is we're not travelers. We do have an opportunity if we want to really, as you say, go deeper into a culture. We're still in a bubble, I think, as expatriates typically, but we do get to have a deeper sense of the culture and a deeper appreciation.
So shifting gears just a little bit, you're obviously a storyteller, as I'm hoping our listeners are picking up on as you share your experiences with us. But I think that's really made your book a very easy and entertaining read on one level. But on another level, I really found it very thought-provoking. You talk about your family handbook in a way that made me reflect on my own family, rules in quotes. And so I think your book's really powerful in that sense. So there's a lot of different reasons people may want to read it. Like it could just be wanting to hear about your experiences, or it could be that they want to use it as a tool to dive a bit deeper in their own experience and mindset. And I think that was one of your intentions, because there's actually some questions at the end that I think are a great tool for people. But why don't you tell us a little bit about the family handbook, what you meant by it, and how it shifted for you as you were bouncing around overseas?
Okay, well, thank you for inviting that. I did start to write this not as a memoir, but as a second solo show, because I really felt that at a certain point we were being told that the rest of the world is bad, and that's not been my experience. So I wanted to push back, and I thought, I can tell my travel stories because everyone loves the travel misadventures, which is I have had a few. I'm hoping all the listeners have too. And as I told more and more stories, I did find, though, that what people were really hungry for was the emotional journey of the narrator. So it turned into a memoir without my even knowing it. And it really turned into a memoir once I really stumbled upon this notion of a metaphorical family handbook. It's not an actual handbook, but I really realized I was going out into the world carrying a lot of rules with me that I didn't even know to question. That whole sense of the water that we grow up swimming in, we don't question it. And through the book, it's not only my literal journey, but yes, it's my emotional journey to become, I like to say, going from unconsciously incompetent, like I don't even know that there are rules that are running the show, to becoming consciously incompetent, where it's like, oh my goodness, these are rules that are running the background computer language, to more consciously competent. And I think what kicked it off is, if I could just share, the first rule is what I start the book out with is repeat, how lucky am I? Because as an expatriate, if I had $1 for every time someone told me how lucky I was as an expatriate, and I was, and I think we can all agree, it's an amazing privilege, and yet I allowed that to stop me from sharing with people how lonely I was, how lost I was, how angry I was sometimes. I didn't give voice to any of that because all I heard was the rule of just how lucky are you? I heard the rule of if you want it done right, do it yourself, which I lived by for half a century. Always put others first, which is a nice thing to be of service. And yet I need to grow beyond that. Don't air your dirty laundry in public. I mean, I had several of my oldest friends contact me after reading the book and said, I'm so sorry. If I had known how much you needed a friend, I would have reached out. And I said, I appreciate that, but that's completely on me, not to blame myself, but I did not know it was okay to say, I'm lost. Can someone throw me a lifeline? I don't know anyone here. Can someone please take me under their wing? I'm lonely. It's like I really needed to learn how to be in communication with other people, because the biggest rule in my family handbook was, and I always say my mom had this long before Nike had it, was just do it. So, I mean, I was just like, I speak languages. I'm well traveled. This is going to be a piece of cake. And it was not. It profoundly was not a piece of cake, either expatriating nor repatriating. And yes, a huge privilege and a joy, but also if there's one thing I learned, it's like, ask for help. We are not alone. So that's the journey I take readers on, I hope, in this book. Yes, with my misadventures along the way, falling into canals that no one else seems to have fallen into, and going up into towers with rabid monkeys. Why do that? I'm not sure. So I do
Well,
like to make people laugh along the way.
Well, and you do. And you heard me laugh because when you said don't air your dirty laundry, I'm thinking the woman is on stage. She's in print in very well-known publications, and she's put a book right out there that airs all the dirty laundry. So
True.
I love it. And I think that's evidence of your journey, and you do it with humor, because some of the things you touch on in your book are very deep and painful experiences. So I think the fact that you've kept your sense of humor and you've learned lessons along the way is a credit to, your family for instilling some sense of, what's the right word for it? I mean, duty and service and whatnot is a nice foundation, but then you yourself were able to pull yourself out of that and turn it into what you needed it to be in your life. So I applaud you for that.
Believe everyone has this hero or heroine's journey, and I'm profoundly interested in that for other people. So that's a lot of what I do now, is work with people if they want to tell their stories. Not everyone does, in memoir or in story, because people are so interesting. It's so fascinating. And you're right, people will say to me, oh, you're so brave to share about infertility, or about, I think my drinking, which was, I think, for a lot of expatriates, people don't talk about these things, and the loneliness, and as I say, and to me, that does not feel brave. That feels human. I want us all to know we're just doing the best we can, one foot in front of the other. So you're right. People are like, well, it's so brave of you. I'm like, I am not lacking in bravery. What I'm lacking in sometimes is knowing I don't always need to be so darn brave.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So are there areas of your life that you've reeled it back in, it being kind of general?
Yeah, I do talk about, the word that many of us with my particular emotional makeup have a hard time with is no, the NO with a point at the end of it, because as a recovering perfectionist, and the book could have been a recovering people pleaser, I find it very hard to say no. And certainly when, we were overseas and everyone wanted to come visit us, which I really understood, and I loved having them, but I really had no sense of my own boundaries, and I had no sense of my own desires in terms of what I wanted to do with my life. I was very wrapped up in making sure everyone else was okay, particularly my husband, who never asked me to do that. That's really comes from me, and everyone else in the whole world. You have to come, and back-to-back visitors, and back-to-back, making sure I'm being the perfect corporate spouse and perfect expatriate and perfect. It's like, what? I mean, I really have learned it's braver for me to say it's enough to just be a human being. It's that is brave enough. And to also really listen to my own desires in terms of what I want to share with the world as an artist, as a creative person, and put that first. That still takes a lot of bravery for me every day to say, wait a minute, put your own life first. I mean, I talk a lot about put your own life jacket on, but I mean in terms of what do I want to do with the time on this earth? It's like, it's not necessarily just setting up another cocktail party.
Right. Well, and I'm sure there were some you actually talk about this in your book, but like there were some, you were not a paid employee, but there were some expectations of you that went along with your husband's position. And so I can see where that could, along with the visitors, really take over your time. And, what I heard you say and, you were grateful for your experience and you were also lonely. And I think that's something that so many people that live an international lifestyle can relate to, because people look at our Facebook posts and think we're just on vacation and, oh, look, another visitor. Isn't that fun? And as you said, it is fun, but it's very easy to lose yourself in that busy lifestyle. So I think a lot of what you experience is very relatable for people.
Well, thank you. And I know that you're really devoted to helping people find their voices and their journeys too. And I think it takes letting go of some of these old rules. It takes, I always say, for me, there was a real emotional payoff in doing all these things for other people. I mean, I could keep the halo really, really shiny, really shiny.
Right.
And it's so often I say that the things that drive me to my knees in desperation are the things that help me to grow. So it was when people started to say, oh, you're a saint. I was like, wait a minute, I really don't want to be a saint. But I'm the only one who's polishing the halo. No one was expecting me. I mean, there are a couple people who really didn't want me to change. Let's be honest. Mentioning no names here. But a couple people for whom it was really convenient for me to be like satisfying their every need. But it was never my husband, and it was never the people closest to me. They're like, no, we want you to live your life. We want you to have your life. And if that means saying no to us sometimes, say no to us sometimes.
And that's so fortunate, because many people are surrounded by people, as you said, like whenever you make a change, it impacts other people. So there are some people that will try to stop us from changing. And when I say changing, I'm actually referring to growing. And so a lot of times we have to step back and really assess our life and who's around us. And that's really a challenge in a lot on a lot of levels. But I always remind myself, when I'm saying yes to something, I'm saying no to something else. And for many women, especially, I think the no is our own passions and dreams and whatever else we want to call it. So I love what you're saying, because I think a lot of people can relate to your experience on some level, even if they haven't lived abroad.
I'm going to really incorporate that, because I never thought of it that way, that when I'm saying yes to something, I'm saying no to something else, which is, I'm just recapping this so that I integrate it.
Please do.
It's usually something that I maybe has a lot of importance for me, but I don't put it top of the list, or even second or third. So you're right. There are some people who really are growing threatens their status quo. I did at some point have someone, again, no names will be mentioned, but who said to me, "Oh, you used to be a lot more helpful," and and I just said, "Oh, I'm sorry," like with a smile on my face. I was like, "Burn! I'm sorry." It's like we got to let people grow and change and expand and flourish and be their own. We just get this one life. So I'm grateful for all the times it was kind of right in my face. It's like, are you going to continue doing this for the rest of your life? Or are you going to let go of the emotional payoff and try to see what's out there for me?
Margaret, I'm catching myself, because every time I've ever had a conversation with you, every time I've been lucky enough to have a conversation with you, we could go on for hours and hours. And that's the case right now, but I'm stopping us. And what I am going to say is that I really hope you have so much more to share. I just hope that you'll come back for a full-length episode with Doreen in the future, so we can talk about that offline, because there's so much more to share. Is there one tip or resource that you'd recommend to our listeners as they repatriate, with, all of the repatriations you've had and the self-evaluation that you've gone through? Like, what do you think others could do to make their act of landing back in their passport country, they're facing reverse culture shock? Like, what can they do to make it an easier period for themselves?
I mean, I think it seems very small to people, but I genuinely believe reach out to one person or one organization who has a chance of understanding what you're experiencing, as opposed to expecting people who have never done this to understand, because it hasn't been their experience any more than I have not had the experience of what it's like to, stay in my hometown and have a family and have the white picket fence, et cetera, et cetera. I just don't have that experience. So I'm not as good a resource to people. I try to listen, but reach out to someone and tell them how you really are so that you can get support is what I would beg people to do. Just remember, we are not alone.
That's really important. And I think back to your comment where your friend called you and said, if I would have known. So I think even if it's a friend that has never experienced the same things you have, just reaching out and being honest, I think opens that door for them to support you. So thank you for sharing that. It's really important. So, as I said, I read your book and I'm encouraging everyone else to do the same. They can, it's sold pretty much everywhere, right? It's online and bookstores.
Any bookstore in the world. Any
Okay.
bookstore in the world can order it if they don't have it in stock. And then for people who use Amazon, it's currently on sale. And I would be happy to send anyone a dedication. I can scan it and email it to you if you choose to buy the paperback, which would thrill me. It's also available as a Kindle, but literally any bookstore can order it. And I would be very touched for anyone who journeys with me. And I'd really love to be in contact with people. So anyone's welcome to email me if they're interested in, telling a story themselves, or if they're that person who's like, oh, wow, I kind of reach out to this person to say how I'm feeling. I'm dedicated to this. So I'm here if I can be helpful.
And what's the best way for people to reach you? Your website, your email address? We'll put it all in the links, but why don't you give us your website address?
Sure. It's my first and last name. So that's a little bit long to spell, but that's the website. It's really easy. I do have a sign up there, but I'll be honest with you, I don't really do anything with that. I don't do a newsletter, and people are very welcome to email me. It's just Margaret@margaretghielmetti.com. So, crazy last name. Life was easier as a Davis, but what are you going to do? So I know you'll have this in the link, and I appreciate that.
Right. And I'm just going to spell your last name for people. It's Ghielmetti. And if you search for the book, Bravish, a memoir of a recovering perfectionist, make sure you put the ish on brave in parentheses so that it pops up. I highly encourage everyone, again, to read the book. And also, if you Google Margaret, some of her performances will come up on YouTube. And they're short and amazing, and I really encourage people to look at them. So I just want to say thank you so much for being here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your time in Switzerland this summer.
Thanks so much, Linda. Really, it's a joy. I admire the heck out of what you're doing, and thank you for being a light for people in the world. We need it. So hi to everyone, and thanks again for today.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.